They had already done the impossible once, sold everything, left steady jobs, moved from Florida to Texas with no construction experience and no clear plan, and built a fully functioning off-grid home out of shipping containers from the ground up, while documenting every single step for an audience that grew to more than 1.3 million people. That story was remarkable enough on its own, but the story that most of their audience doesn't fully know, the one that explains where Mackenzie and Spencer are actually headed, starts not with shipping containers or YouTube subscribers. It starts with a road trip to Alaska in 2016 that neither of them could have predicted would change the direction of the rest of their lives. Mackenzie is one half of the couple behind Life Uncontained, one of the most watched DIY off-grid homesteading channels on YouTube. And while millions of people have followed their building journey, the containers, the solar panels, the rainwater collection system, the two daughters, the setbacks, far fewer people know what was actually happening behind the scenes during the years it took to build that life. The pressures that nearly derailed it, the decisions that didn't make the highlight reel, and the move they made that went well beyond anything the channel's original premise suggested. Because by the time the dust settled, Mackenzie and Spencer weren't just living in a shipping container home outside Houston. They had their eyes on something else entirely. A 6.5-acre mountain property in Ridgway, Colorado, with a 2,000-square-foot cabin, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a completely different vision of what their life was going to look like. The question worth asking is, how did a couple who started with nothing but a container and a camera end up there? And more importantly, what decision did Mackenzie make that even longtime viewers didn't see coming? Most people who follow Life Uncontained know the broad outline. Mackenzie and Spencer were living in Florida, working conventional jobs, paying bills, and living a life that looked perfectly normal from the outside. For a while, that was enough. But in 2016, they went on a road trip to Alaska. And that trip didn't just inspire them, it fundamentally changed how they understood what was possible. Along the way, they stayed in a converted train car in Washington state that had been turned into a solar-powered hotel. They spent time in an Earthship house in Teos, New Mexico, a structure built entirely from recycled materials, designed to sustain itself with no connection to the power grid. These weren't tourist attractions. They were proof that people were actually living differently and doing it successfully. When Mackenzie and Spencer returned to Florida, the idea didn't fade, it grew. But it stayed an idea for 2 more years, held in place by practical realities, property values, job security, the weight of the life they'd already built. What finally pushed them over the edge wasn't one dramatic moment. According to their own channel description and early videos, it was a combination of rising housing costs, financial pressure, and a growing sense that the conventional path wasn't going to deliver the life they actually wanted. The dream of the hippies of the 70s, as they described it themselves, living on your own terms, outside the grid, debt-free, started to feel not just desirable, but necessary. On March 1, 2018, Mackenzie and Spencer sold their cars, sold their Florida home, quit their jobs, and drove toward Texas with essentially nothing but a plan to build something new. They had no construction experience, no contractor lined up, no safety net if it all fell apart. What they did have was a piece of land in the woods outside Houston, owned by Spencer's parents, and a specific, unconventional idea for what they were going to put on it. They were also going to film every single bit of it. The channel launched in March 2018, the same month they arrived in Texas. The premise was straightforward enough. A couple building an off-grid shipping container home from scratch, documenting it all, with no prior experience in construction, plumbing, electrical work, or sustainable building systems. What made it actually work wasn't just the novelty of the shipping containers, it was the transparency. Mackenzie and Spencer didn't pretend to know what they were doing. They showed the mistakes alongside the progress, the days when things went wrong, the days when the budget got tight, the days when the complexity of what they'd taken on became genuinely visible to anyone watching. The home was never going to be connected to the power grid. It would run entirely on solar energy. Water would come from a rainwater collection system they built themselves. The goal, stated plainly from the very beginning, was to build debt-free. No mortgage, no payments to a utility company. A home that belonged to them completely, with no institution between them and the land. That goal proved far harder to achieve than the early videos made it look. The build stretched across 4 years. There were supply problems, technical problems, design revisions, and the kind of unexpected costs that come with any major construction project, but especially one where the builders are learning the craft as they go. During those 4 years, their family also grew. Their older daughter, Bo, was part of the channel's story from the early homestead days. In August 2021, their second daughter, Cam, was born, with a nursery built specifically inside the container home in anticipation of her arrival. By the time the primary structure was functionally complete, the channel had accumulated nearly 300 episodes and crossed 1 million subscribers. What had started as a personal experiment had become one of the most recognized names in the off-grid and alternative living space on YouTube. And then, for many viewers, things went quieter than expected. Uncontained, there is something that happens to channels built around a specific construction project. The project ends. The container home was finished. The solar system worked. The rainwater collection system worked. The family was in there, living the life they'd promised to build on camera. From the outside, it looked like the story had reached its natural conclusion. The central question that had powered the entire channel, can they actually pull this off, had been answered. But Mackenzie and Spencer had never framed the channel as just a build log. From the beginning, it was described as a life, not a project with a finish line, a way of living they were choosing to document indefinitely. That distinction mattered, because it set up a challenge they couldn't fully anticipate at the start. The channel continued to post content through 2022, 2023, and into 2024. But the nature of what it was posting had changed. What had once been a steady stream of construction updates, with the built-in tension of a multi-year DIY project, where the outcome was genuinely uncertain, had become something different, more lifestyle-oriented, more reflective, less urgently driven by the question of what would happen next. For a channel that had grown on the strength of forward momentum, that shift registered. There's a detail worth noting here that most casual viewers would have no reason to know. The TVDB, which tracks episode logs for content channels, recorded 288 episodes of Life Uncontained, running from March 2018 through July 2024. That is a remarkable 6-year run of consistent output. But the episode log stopping there is significant. It indicates that by mid-2024, the channel's upload cadence had changed substantially enough that regular episode tracking essentially ceased. That raises a question. If the build was complete, the family was settled, and the channel had well over 1 million subscribers, what was Mackenzie working toward next? And why did the channel's direction quietly shift in the way it did? The answer starts with a property that has almost nothing to do with Texas. Among the lesser-known developments in the Life Uncontained story is something several sources have documented, but that most casual viewers of the channel have likely never come across. The acquisition of a 6.5-acre mountain property in Ridgway, Colorado. Ridgway is a small town in Ouray County in southwestern Colorado, positioned in the shadow of the San Juan Mountains between Montrose and Ouray. It's known for dramatic elevation, steep terrain, and the kind of landscape that is about as far removed as it's possible to get from the flat, wooded land outside Houston, where Mackenzie and Spencer built their container home. The property they acquired there features a 2,000-square-foot cabin with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. It's been described as a retreat for intentional living, a space organized around the same philosophy that drove the Texas build, but in an entirely different physical setting and at a fundamentally different scale of ambition. This wasn't a vacation purchase or a side investment. According to reporting on the channel's trajectory, the plan for the Colorado property connects directly to the broader vision that Mackenzie and Spencer have been working towards since the beginning, creating spaces that allow people to disconnect from conventional life, live more deliberately, and engage with a community built around those values. The Texas container home proved that the concept worked for them personally. The Colorado property represented something larger, a version of that same concept extended beyond just their own family. A space that could serve their audience, their community, the 1.3 million people who had been watching for years and who understood, at least in part, what they were trying to build. What's important to understand is the sequence here. The Texas build had to come first. It had to work. It had to be documented, shared, tested, and proven across years of footage before any of this next chapter could exist. The Colorado property wasn't a departure from what Mackenzie and Spencer had been doing. It was the natural consequence of having done it successfully. But that consequence came with its own demands, and its own new set of pressures on Mackenzie specifically. There's a distinction worth making here that tends to get lost in coverage of Life Uncontained, which often treats Mackenzie and Spencer as a single, interchangeable unit, rather than 2 people with specific individual contributions to a shared project. Spencer has consistently been identified as the technical dimension of the builds, the one handling hands-on construction, engineering decisions, and the physical labor of turning industrial shipping containers into livable structures. Mackenzie, by contrast, brought the creative element, the visual presentation, the storytelling instinct, the human dimension that made the channel's documentation not just informative, but genuinely compelling to watch for people who would never attempt any of this themselves. That distinction matters because it explains what the channel's success actually depended on. The builds could be executed, the solar systems could be installed, the rainwater collection could be engineered, but none of it would have reached 1.3 million people without someone capable of translating those construction decisions into a story that resonated emotionally. That was Mackenzie's work. And here's what most people who follow the channel don't think about. That work doesn't stop when the build stops. If anything, it becomes more complicated. Because when there's no longer a construction timeline with a clear beginning, middle, and end, you're responsible for creating narrative momentum out of everyday life. That's a fundamentally different creative challenge than documenting a build where something physically changes on camera every single week. The shift the channel went through after the Texas container home was completed wasn't just a change in subject matter. It was a change in what the role of content creator actually required. And Mackenzie was at the center of figuring out what the channel's identity was going to be in that next phase. The Colorado property is, in significant part, the answer she and Spencer landed on. Step back and look at the full arc of what Life Uncontained has actually been, and the decision Mackenzie made becomes a lot clearer and a lot more significant than it might first appear. In 2018, the premise was audacious but bounded. 2 people, no experience, a piece of family land in Texas, and a plan to build an off-grid home out of shipping containers without going into debt. The audience grew because that premise was genuinely uncertain. Would the roof hold? Would the solar system actually power a full household? Would the rainwater collection be enough? Would the family make it through 4 years of this? They answered all of it. Every question the channel started with, they answered on camera over the course of 288 documented episodes. But here's what makes Mackenzie's decision notable. When most people finish a project of that scale and complexity, when they've proven the thing they set out to prove, built the thing they set out to build, and grown an audience of more than 1 million people along the way, the natural instinct is to consolidate, to protect what you've built, to keep doing what worked. Mackenzie didn't do that. The Colorado property in Ridgeway, the 6.5 acres, the cabin, the framework for a community retreat built around intentional living, represents a choice to take everything the Texas build produced and extend it into territory that goes well beyond what any of the original viewers signed up for. It's not just a bigger home or a second property. It's a different idea entirely about what the platform they've built is actually for. The Texas build was about proving something to themselves. It was a private experiment conducted publicly, 2 people testing whether a different kind of life was achievable, with a camera running the entire time. The Colorado chapter is about what happens when the experiment works, and you have to decide what to do with the result. The answer Mackenzie and Spencer arrived at is, you open it up. You build something that other people can be part of. You take the proof of concept and turn it into something with a wider reach. That shift, from personal story to something designed to welcome a community, is the decision that even longtime viewers of the channel haven't fully registered. Because it doesn't look like a dramatic announcement. It doesn't come with a single video where everything changes. It's the result of years of smaller decisions compounding towards something that now looks, from the outside, like a completely different destination than where the channel started. The guest cabin and additional structures that Mackenzie and Spencer have discussed as part of their evolving plans are still in development. Their commitment to building debt-free runs through everything they've announced. The Colorado property, like the Texas build, is being approached from the same self-sufficient framework that defined the channel from day one. More than 1.3 million people are still subscribed to the channel. The Patreon that they launched in the early days of the Texas project remains active, with supporters continuing to back the ongoing documentation process. In Mackenzie and Spencer's own words on that platform, the pledges help them focus their time and energy on continuing to produce content, and this is only the beginning. The planning around the Colorado property describes a space designed for people to come and genuinely disconnect. Not in the way a hotel lets you unplug for a weekend, but in the way Mackenzie and Spencer themselves disconnected when they left Florida in 2018, by stepping fully outside the framework of conventional living and experiencing what it looks like on the other side. The guest house, the cabin in the mountains, the 6.5 acres of Colorado terrain that looks nothing like the Texas woods where this all began. These are the pieces of the next phase of a project that started with 2 people selling their cars and driving toward a piece of land they'd never built on. What's different now is that Mackenzie isn't just building for herself and Spencer and their 2 daughters. She's building towards something that the audience she spent 6 years creating can actually be part of. That's a long way from a shipping container on a piece of borrowed Texas land. But it also makes complete sense if you've been paying attention to what Life Uncontained was always really about, which was never the containers themselves. It was about choosing to live differently and being willing to figure out what that looks like one decision at a time. What Mackenzie and Spencer built over those 6 years isn't really about shipping containers. It never was. The containers were just the form the decision took. The actual decision was to stop waiting for the right moment to live the way they wanted to live, and to document that choice honestly, in real time, for anyone willing to watch. The Colorado property in Ridgeway, the cabin, the vision of a space designed around intentional living and community. All of it is the direct consequence of that original decision holding up under the weight of reality, of the experiment actually working. As of now, Mackenzie and Spencer are still building, still documenting, still working toward a version of self-sufficient living they've been developing since a road trip to Alaska showed them what was possible. The channel has more than 1.3 million subscribers. The Patreon is still active. The Colorado property is still in development. The story isn't finished. Here's the question worth sitting with. If you had spent 4 years building something from nothing, proving that it was possible, would you have stayed comfortable with what you'd already created, or would you have looked at a mountain property in Colorado and decided there was a second chapter worth building from scratch?